We're also industry colleagues. And we're part of an industry which was in its infancy when it started. And it's grown to be, I would say, the pride of the nation. So as Rajesh pointed out, Anand is 84 batch. How many people from 84 batch here? 84 batch. Computer science.
Computer science.
Patel Hall.
Patel Hall.
Patel Hall? Folks from Patel Hall? Okay. We have few folks from Patel Hall over here. And again, as Rajesh mentioned, after his graduation, he went to the US where he did his PhD again in computer science. I think, where was it? Indiana University. And from there, he was actually engaged with HP Labs in Palo Alto. Worked there for some time and then decided to come back to India. So my first question to you, Anand, is why did you come back to India?
So first, let me thank you for hosting me here. It's an honor to have someone senior from Kharagpur asking all these questions. So we have met on phone and otherwise. So thanks for hosting me. It's also a pleasure to be here with IIT Alumni. So thank you for inviting me here. Why did I come back? Well, when you are 28, you are not sure what you want to do. So I had a few things going on in my job there at HP. But at that point, the Indian software industry was starting to happen. And Mr. Vittal, who was the secretary DOE, he visited the Bay Area when I was there. And he was making a very passionate appeal for people to come back to India. And I was at that stage where I thought if I should come back, I should do it early rather than late. I was still single and I just decided to back off and come back without too much of a plan. Thankfully, I had some business when I came back, so it wasn't too bad.
So Mr. Vittal is known to be the person who is actually the father of the tech industry. The reforms that he brought about as Secretary DOE is what has really contributed to the growth of the nation in this area. But just like you had advice and a mentor like Vittal, I'm going to ask you another question. Actually, what took you to IIT and Kharagpur in the first place?
So my JEE rank was 1285. So at that point, my parents lived in Delhi at that time, so I could have been in Delhi, but you couldn't get much else if you didn't go to Kharagpur. So I ended up in Aero in Kharagpur. So 79 for 2 years I did Aero, and then I changed to computer science. So a new department happened.
Okay. So that's very interesting because even my rank was in the thousands. And interestingly, I was quite confused. As a 15-year-old person, if your rank is so low, what do you do? What engineering do you do? And it just so happened that there was a young, handsome, strapping gentleman who had just passed out of IIT Kharagpur, and he was getting engaged to a lady whose father was my father's postmate in the armed forces. So my dad said, go and meet this gentleman. And this gentleman was Arjun Malhotra. Many of you know Arjun Malhotra. And so, I asked him, mera rank ye hai, what should I do? He said, isme kya confusion hai? Kharagpur jao. And so, I just went and said, what is the department in Kharagpur? And, yours was aero, mine was mining, and so I landed up in Kharagpur doing mining engineering. So, Anand, having landed up in Kharagpur, are there some experiences that have really stayed with you as your credo, throughout your life or your career, which has guided you, has been your guiding philosophy?
Yes, sure. See, Kharagpur was a very formative year for me, formative 5 years. I grew up in Bhopal basically, so it was very different. I grew up in an engineering town really. My father worked for Bharat Heavy Electricals, so I grew up in a township, and it was very protected, very different. And I showed up in Kharagpur and I was quite clueless for the first 6 months. But very soon I figured out how to optimize life, and life was very good after that.
Optimizing. Okay. So,
Once you see what happens in the first semester, you find out that there are some half a dozen people who are going to be whatever 10 pointers, or that point we didn't have, would have great grades. Everyone else after that was, just fine. Right? So once you optimize that, you don't have to be in the top certain percentage, and you can't. It was very hard to flunk it.
okay. So you survived and you thrived and you've done extremely well for yourself. I went to Kharagpur in the 70s, and it was actually, those of you who remember the 70s, that was the peak of the Naxal movement. And so, a lot of people were very worried, "Hey, तुमने क्या किया? Why are you going to Kharagpur, all the places जहाँ इतना दंगा फंसा?" So the one thing, and of course, the other thing was Kharagpur in those days was known for its unique ragging, right? Not that I am in favor of that, but that was the situation in those days. And one would, people were concerned. So one of the things which I learned, Anand, in Kharagpur is that worrying is a complete waste of time. Complete waste of time. I mean, there are challenges, and you need to deal with those challenges as you encounter those challenges. So that's been my guiding philosophy and ethos. But Anand, you've been a very successful entrepreneur. You built your organization, from the early 90s, and it's a billion-dollar global corporation. So for the young people over here, what kind of guidance or advice would you give them that can help them in their careers or in their business ventures?
So actually it's a hard question, because it all depends on what stage of life you are in and what you are trying to do. But I have a framework for how to manage your career. And there what I tell people is, in your first 10 years of your career, you should focus on learning and networking. Basically, you should learn how to learn, and you should learn how to network. And the networking skills, I did get quite a bit of them during Kharagpur actually. It was very useful to meet a lot of people who were very different from what I had grown up. So that was one very important skill, and I find anybody who is starting out, they should focus on these two skills really aggressively. In the second 10 years, I recommend to people that they should become an expert at something. Just another person in the network is not very useful. You have to be good at something, and the world should say what you are good at. So you have to be able to build your own personal brand on how you can become an expert at something, and the world should say you are an expert at it. And one of the important things that I would mention here for building a brand, personal brand, is to have other people talk about you, which will only happen if you talk about other people. So if you want to do this, you have to give first before you can take from the network. And this is where the Alumni Association to some extent plays a very good role. Because if you have friends, they'll tell good things about you, they'll invite you to the right places, and then good things happen. So that is really what I would recommend to the young people, that if you build a network and work off the network, a lot of good things can happen to you, and it doesn't happen by accident, but you can systematically build this network.
Excellent insights. I think what Anand is basically saying is, there are times when it does not matter what you know, how much you know, but who you know, which makes all the difference.
You can always go to them, right? You can always ask somebody what to do. We are always lost anyway, so there's always someone who is there who is giving you the guidance. And that's where I think some of the work you are doing with Vrishti kind of aligns with that, right? Meaning those who have seen the world can share what they have seen in the past.
And just to add to what Anand is saying, personal branding, your network, the very famous saying, your network is your net worth, right? The people you know is what makes you valuable. And so it's so important, this insight. The other thing is, how do you build your network? You build your network by building relationships, right? And how do you build relationships? You build relationships by creating trust and mutual respect. And how do you create trust? You create trust by two things. Number one, having some competence. I think that's what he said. You must have some competence. People must trust you that, okay, he understands this subject. He knows this subject.
It is also a good trust factor.
Correct.
You are at Kharagpur, so
So building trust and mutual relationships is the cornerstone for building your network. Excellent insights. Now, Anand, you built a successful business, and I know many people who have built successful businesses, and particularly, there could be many people who are very experienced KGPians over here. I've often found that they find it difficult to let go and have difficulty in planning succession. I think that's something perhaps you've experienced and perhaps you've done it quite successfully. Can you just share your insight on how to let go and let other people take over so that you can do what you want to do?
Right. So, just to put this in context, I started the business in 1990, and in 2019, I realized that I'd been doing almost 30 years of persistent, and I was trying to think what my next 30 years would look like. And it was very clear I could do this for another 4, 5, 6 years, but it just didn't make sense to keep doing this. So that was one factor. The other thing that happened around the time I turned 50 was I realized that, and I've been talking to a few friends and they all mentioned that you should learn, earn and return. And I think that's the logo Kharagpur also uses. So when you think about return, the idea was that should you retire and then return, or can you do while you are still working? So at around 52, when I was in that zone, I decided let's start a non-profit, which is a personal non-profit. And this is called Dayasara Foundation, which is mainly the family foundation. And we have now been at it for 10 years. But the fact that I had enough things to do outside of persistent made it much easier to kind of move on, because you couldn't be doing nothing. So you had to find something else to do. So as long as I had enough things to do which were exciting, were impactful, and could go on for a long time, I mean 25, 30 years. Those are the three things I would recommend anyone who wants to do succession. One is you have to find something you can still be excited about, because otherwise, why would you want to do it? Second, you need to make sure that you want to be impactful after all. Whatever you want to do, you don't want to just do it. Being useful in a particular job, you run a business, you don't feel like not being important or not being relevant. And finally, you want to pick projects at 60 or so that will last long enough. Otherwise, you'll have to find another project later on, which is something I don't want to do again.
Okay, so another great insight: learn, earn, and return. Right? I think there are three phases, one of the things I must tell you is currently the tech industry is having a little difficulty, right? I mean, growth rates are not as much as before, but one of the companies which is an outlier is Persistent Systems. So I think it's been helpful that you let go and let somebody else run the business.
Yes, fresh legs, next edition.
Okay, so that was about succession planning. Before I ask Anand, a few things about how he's returning and his foundation. Anybody in the audience has any question for Anand? Anybody in the audience? Any questions for Anand? Okay, so Anand, let this be the last question. Sorry. Hey.
Hello, Anand. Thanks for being here. Really an honor to be with you. One question. You have literally achieved the epitome of time. Built a great business, you're successful, KGP before the hour. So now, what gives you energy anymore? Yes, you are returning enough. Is that what gives you energy, or what is the energy? What keeps you going?
It's the same question you want to ask.
Yeah, good.
So, as I mentioned, when I was trying to decide what next, I was trying to look for activities that I could remain passionate about, one, which should scale, and third, which should last for a long time. So with this, I have three broad areas in which I've been spending time and thinking a lot about. One set is around entrepreneurship. Second, I'm a techie, so I'm a data guy, so I work in data and to some extent data, healthcare, professional stuff. And the third area I've been working on is on how to manage careers, continuous learning and things of that kind. So the three broad pillars on which I've been spending a lot of my time right now. And I find that these problems that I'm trying to address, whether it's on entrepreneurship or health and data and some of these others, they're not going to be quote unquote solved in my lifetime. So, which is a good thing in a way, meaning I don't have to worry about being done.
So I think the essence of what Anand's trying to say is that there is nothing more motivating than having a purpose in life. So really you need to create a purpose.
You need a purpose which is ambitious enough that you feel like, working on it. I mean, if you defined a purpose that was not very meaningful, then you might feel like, my life was better when I was the jockey in some sense. But now, much different.
Okay, so I think perhaps we are, out of time. Anand, such a pleasure. Thank you so much. Anand has come all the way from from Pune to join us here today and share his experiences. It's such a pleasure to have such an accomplished KGP amongst us and talking to us. Thank you so much.
Thank you.